Hey there, friends. Welcome to the Being Brown and Bold podcast. I am your host, Jess Thomas. We are so glad that you're joining us for all of our amazing conversations about stepping out of our comfort zone, being bold, and taking chances. Today, I get to have a couple of friends with me from the South. As you all know, I am in Tennessee. I've got my friend Meherwan Irani and Vishwesh Bhatt, who are going to talk about our South Asian identity, about food culture. And if you don't know who they are, number one, they both are James Beard Award-winning, amazing people. But I know them because they are just uniting the South Asians in the South specifically, but now like all over the place. You should run and get this cookbook called I Am From Here from Vishwesh Bhatt. Did it get nominated for James Beard? Obviously. Did Meherwan? Yes. Did their restaurants? Yes. Over and over. So I don't have to convince you, if you can ever make it to either of their restaurants, to definitely eat there. This is basically just us hanging out with our imaginary chai and talking about our culture, our life, and how our background has informed where we are today. So thank you both for joining me on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Great to be here. And it was such a nice surprise to see Vish pop up on the screen.
How did you two even become friends?
Who says we are friends?
Okay, how did you come to know of each other, I guess?
I met Vish, again, speaking of the South, in Atlanta at the Atlanta Food and Wine Festival years ago. I mean, I want to say 2016, 2015, maybe even that far back.
Yeah.
And we were introduced by Asha Gomez, another legendary culinary figure in the South, a great chef. And we were at a party she was giving, and she introduced us both. And the rest, as they say, is history. Traumatizing history, but history.
Or match made in heaven.
Well, actually, it's a match made in heaven. I mean, Vish is one of my near and dear friends, and a big inspiration behind, for example, the conversations we've had around Brown the South, Southern identity, what's it mean to be, of Asian descent, and living and cooking and making a business for yourself in the South.
We started having conversations, of just things we were doing. And we just realized that there are lots more people like us who have come to the South and have settled and made enormous contributions. And it was time for someone to start a conversation about that. I always viewed myself as Southerner who is of Indian descent. And that's a different conversation than having an Indian who lives in the South. They're two different things. And for me, it was important to claim my place where I've been here for 30 plus years, and this is home. This is where I've been longer than anywhere else. Just felt it was an important conversation to have.
Okay, but both of you started out in India, but are you both from different places in India?
Yeah, completely. I mean, I'm from Maharashtra, so outside of Mumbai, a small town called Pune. And actually outside of Pune, an even smaller town called Ahmednagar. My family moved from Pune to Ahmednagar. And Vish is from the great state of Gujarat.
Yeah, and so I grew up in a city called Ahmedabad, with a different Ahmed. And then in India, former rulers would name cities after themselves. So there was an Ahmed that established Ahmednagar, another different Ahmed established Ahmedabad. So there was some connection there, maybe. So I grew up in a mid-sized city north of Bombay.
We actually are connected culturally to a certain degree. My people, Parsis, that are originally from back then Persia, first settled in Gujarat and picked up the local language. So all Parsis speak Gujarati, picked up a lot of the culinary customs and, of course, the cultural customs, and then eventually migrated from Gujarat down to Bombay and to Maharashtra. But still, till today, much of the Parsi culture is a commingling of their ancient Persian culture and the culture of Gujarat, which is where Vish speaks of growing up. And the other common factor is that both of our regions were under Muslim rulers or Mughal rulers for a while. So there's a heavy influence of sort of that Mughal culture in both the cuisine and the city in Ahmedabad, as there is in Ahmednagar. I mean, going by the name alone, you can tell they were obviously Muslim emperors, Ahmed and Ahmed.
Tell me how that cultural heritage ended up informing your life and work.
There was always a lot of food being cooked with my mother sort of, helming the kitchen. And so I grew up being in her way because I was the youngest at that time, while she was trying to, do all her daily chores and maintain a house and keep things in order and all that. She would give me things to do, just a task to keep me occupied so I wasn't being a nuisance. And those tasks would be, anything from measuring out some dal to put in a pot, or, here, go rinse this rice, go do something for 5 minutes so I can finish what I'm doing. I enjoyed those tasks because, one, I was spending time with my mother by myself, which was, in that house, a very rare thing. And two, I figured out very quickly that the quicker I did what she asked me to do, the quicker I got to eat or get a snack. I was learning how to cook without really learning how to cook, if that makes sense. And my father was always very fond of, every Sunday, he and I would go to the market. And the market was in the old city. So, we would take the bus and we would go to the old city. He would point out all the monuments and tell me stories about the monuments and the people who built. Very early on, I sort of recognized the legacy of the folks who had built the city. When we moved to the US, realizing that Ahmedabad was almost 400 years older than the entire nation of the United States. And this history is important. And for a lot of friends that I made here in college, their notion of history was very, very small and very compact. And so I would have to say there are places outside of here that have been around a lot longer. So that started that conversation and that sort of notion of America as we're young. And so things that are available here were available somewhere else long before they were available here.
Meherwan, you had talked about, you really missed the food of India.
Yeah, I arrived here to do my MBA, and the first time I went to an Indian buffet, in a strip mall in Columbia, South Carolina, is by the first inkling that I had that Indian food in America was not going to be anywhere close to what I grew up eating and how I grew up eating, let alone sort of the home cooked nature of it, but just the regionality of it. I mean, I grew up in Maharashtra. My mom's from Dehradun. We are Parsis. We had a very specific cuisine. We had a very specific, meals that we ate that spoke to both our being Parsi and the fact that we were Maharashtrian. So to show up here and go to a buffet that was run by Punjabis doing sort of this North Indian classic buffet stuff, tikka masala, and not only that, not done very well. And I'm not being critical. I'm being understanding of why it was not done well when you think about who the folks were that were coming and doing the cooking, and what their background was. It made complete sense. And who the audience was, that also made complete sense. I think that a key characteristic of how my story ended up was that I felt like I was more taken aback than the average Indian immigrant at the state of Indian food in America. The average Indian immigrant seemed to be accepted or be happy with it or to be resigned to it and not pick up much of a fuss.
Yeah, it was a very typical, sort of shrug your shoulder response, right? Yeah. Oh, it is what it is. What can we do about it?
And I think maybe just the fact that there was any Indian food even available to go and eat, for my other Indian, MBA sort of classmates, they didn't seem to particularly mind. And for some reason, I minded a lot. And that was a little bit of a nucleus where, down the road, it kind of kept leading to this idea of, well, what is Indian food in America? Why is Indian food in America? Why does it look this way? This sort of internal conversation that, took, let's see, I was 20 when I got here and 39 when I opened. So 19 years, percolate, before the genesis of Chai Pani.
Wow. Yeah. And, I was born here, but my parents came from India the year before, and they had lived in Delhi, Calcutta, but they grew up in Kerala. So they had different food. Mm-hmm. What was funny is when they had Chinese food in America, after having Chinese food in Calcutta, they're like, what is this? This is not real Chinese food. But they're so used to the Indian Chinese fusion food from Calcutta. And then we grew up with Kerala food, 2-3 times a day in my house. So when I had North Indian food at a restaurant, I thought it was exotic. I'm like, look at this fluffy naan. Like, this is amazing, because it was so unfamiliar to me. Right. And only later, when I went to college and met Indians from other regions, I only knew Malayalis growing up. When I met other people, I was like, chole bhatura, what is that? And so it was eye-opening for me. So I did not have anything to compare it to, because I never had homemade food from Maharashtra, from Gujarat, from North India at all. So to me, I was like, oh, this is good, because so my palate was probably just like every other American, right?
And to a certain degree, that makes sense. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's India today is so different, wherein the regional cuisines are now available pretty much everywhere. I mean, especially in the larger metropolitan cities. But I remember growing up, like there was only one South Indian restaurant in town, just one, and if you wanted a dosa or an uttapam or anything from the South, you have to go to that one South. Average restaurants or street vendors didn't do that, and that was, I miss something about that. I feel like something is lost in this idea that now you could be in any city, anywhere, at any time in India, and have cuisine from all parts of India. Not lost
Yeah,
as in
usually, and many times in just one restaurant.
yes, of course, exactly. North Indian, Chinese, South Indian,
That's
Punjabi,
right, all of
Urdu.
it.
I mean, actually, I went into the kitchen of a restaurant in Pune, Ramakrishna. The menu was exactly what you described, Vish. But then I went in the kitchen, and they had the kitchen set up as different stations for the different cuisines,
Right.
especially because of the pure veg versus the not pure
Yeah,
veg.
no,
So this was the
yes,
Punjabi part of the kitchen, and there was some meat on it. This was the South Indian part of the kitchen. This was the
right.
Gujarati part.
For both of you growing up in India, was there an expectation for either of you as far as like you should be going down this career path?
Yes, I mean, that's typical for what you're describing is very typical of Indian families, that especially if they're going to send their kids abroad, right? It's such a huge endeavor and expense, at least back in the day when I was first going, and to go to America was just a really big deal. Getting a visa was a big deal. So of course there was an expectation that you were not going to blow it, that you were going to, the sacrifice they made to send you, that you were going to take full advantage of them, and in their minds full advantage were more traditional. You're going to be a doctor, you're going to be an engineer, you're going to be a scientist, you're going to be a mathematician. It was always in that sort of for the Indian family that was aspiring to send their kid abroad, like it made sense that higher education would lead to the kind of jobs that we associate with higher education, right? And then there was also certainly another diaspora that came to open small businesses, your motels and your convenience stores and all of that too. And I always felt there were two tracks to America for Indians. One, you go there and you join some business that your cousin or uncle or somebody has started, and that's how you get there. And another is you get there in academic chops. And for the folks that got there in academic chops, so rarely did you see the crossover happen. Rarely did you see the folks that came to get their engineering degree or the doctorate degree suddenly say, well, I'm going to open a motel. Or vice versa. I think what Vish ended up doing and what I ended up doing to a certain degree for the time was unusual.
I came here with my parents. I came here because my parents came here. And my father had gone to college in the States and lived here. My parents had lived here in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and my dad worked at the Oak Ridge National Lab. They were coming back essentially because they saw me after high school sort of, being directionless and floundering and asking lots of questions because I was very frustrated with the education system. And so it was a way for them to say, okay, there's, maybe moving somewhere else, a lot easier move for me. Right. I mean, I wasn't sent by myself. I didn't have to adjust by myself. I came with my parents. I had a home. Dad had a job and established friends that he had known when he was in college. And I knew these folks as they would occasionally come through India or dad would travel for his research. And so it wasn't as much of being somewhere completely different. What was different for me was the amount of space the United States had and the lack of people on streets. I still have trouble with that. There was no question that I was going to go to college. Once I finished undergraduate school, there was absolutely no question that I was going to go to graduate school. My parents asked, like, hey, you applying for graduate school? Where? I did come to Mississippi for graduate school and realized that I didn't really want to do what I thought I always wanted to do, which was be a bureaucrat. Because again, as if you knew growing up in India, the bureaucrats sort of are the doorkeepers of everything. And they seem to have like the cushiest of all jobs and, they get a house. I want to be like that so I can, have some sort of a say in what happens. And I very quickly realized that it was the most terrible thing I would have ever done if I'd actually stayed with it. And I was miserable, and I'd turned 25 and, I had a college degree and I just about to finish graduate school. And it's like the world that we lived in changed because, the Soviet Union stopped existing. And so everything that I had grown up with and learned about how the world worked was no longer true. And I didn't want to do what I thought I wanted to do. And so, but I still had to, pay rent and eat and, support my habits. And so I had to get a job. And the only place I could get a job with the skills I had was in a restaurant. We'll hire anybody. if you are willing and able. So, I started doing that, and, come full circle from those, those early days as a child when, I was learning how to cook without actually cooking, came in handy because I already had some skills in the back of my head. I could watch a pot of beans and know that it needed more liquid, or I could see that the rice was done, and I could, I would instinctively turn it off and move it. And the people who are in the kitchen around me noticed that and sort of moved me, fast tracked me. And I kept doing things and I kept enjoying it. And it finally got to a point where it's like, okay, I want to add some flavor to what we're eating. I mean, is it okay if I add, some spices? Is it okay if I, toast some cumin and sprinkle them on these French fries because I like potatoes and cumin? That combination to me is something, that I grew up with. So, and they're like, sure, why not? And they liked it too, like, oh. And then that was sort of the, the point of no return at that point.
I think what's interesting about both of you is not so much like these amazing cooking skills, it's your palate. And it's like because of what you're familiar with, what you grew up with, because then to communicate that through your food to people and people loving it. Because what's interesting about, okay, I'm making an assumption. For both of you and your restaurants, are most of the cooks South Asian?
No.
No. So then how did you pass that on? Because I feel like that's so important, the flavor part, right? The palate part.
It's a great question. And it just, again, goes to your point. I truly believe if you have the right palate, anybody can figure out how to cook good food. And that is the single most important thing. In all of our restaurants that are doing specifically Indian food, Indian street food for the most part, how do you get a 99.99% non-Indian workforce to understand the palate? That was my challenge. Not how do I get them to actually cook the vada pav or make the bhel puri. That's mechanical, that's recipes, that's follow the process. But how to know if it tastes right or not? I mean, they could certainly eat a hamburger and tell you if there's something wrong with it or not. But could they do that with a vada pav? So putting the emphasis on that, on the development of the taste palate, is the biggest part of our training, including taking as often as we can team members to India. At least twice a year we do that. I can show them, we can cook the food, they can eat it, but to be on the streets of Mumbai at Juhu Beach, eating a pav bhaji, watching it made in front of you, that's when the aha moment happens and it all connects. It's not just about how it tastes in your tongue. I think palate is so influenced by what's around you when you're doing it. Quite often someone will ask me, what's the best meal you ever had? I said, the best meal I ever had, I don't know if I remember that much about the food. I'm sure the food was great. I remember who I was with, where we were, and what we were doing. And that's what made the meal memorable. But what I feel like I spent a lot of time developing and consider it almost a craft is working on that palate. I mean, you got to remember, coming to America, I'd never eaten oysters. I'd never had a medium rare steak. I'd never eaten a mushroom. Avocado is a foreign flavor. Asparagus is a foreign flavor. And these are not things that I said to myself, oh, well, if I like it, great. If I don't like it, not great. I said to myself, a lot of people like these things. Obviously, they must taste good to a lot of people. I can't trust myself that it doesn't taste good to me. I have to train my palate to learn that it should taste good. And that's an important thing for people to know. You can't just you can't trust whether something tastes good to you or not. If a whole bunch of other people think it tastes good, then you got to figure out, how do I train my palate to recognize that there's something important here from a flavor standpoint?
I knew it was the food that I'd grown up with in my family, and a very specific cuisine and a very specific family that's vegetarian. And that's what I had eaten for, 21 years. When I went to an Indian buffet and, had Punjabi dal. Oh, okay. I mean, I knew it was dal. I knew it had the spices that I knew, but it wasn't anything like the dal I'd grown up eating, right? And so that there are other versions of this food out there. Since I didn't really know much about Indian food outside of my own little corner that I'd grown up in, it was all new to me. And so I was a lot freer to experiment and make mistakes. You wanted to open a restaurant like Meherwan did, you had to nail it right away. I didn't have that pressure to nail it right away because I didn't really know it. And so in my case, it was like, well, I can tweak this, right? I know I can take these collard greens and I know I can add a little bit of tamarind and they will, you add that sort of sweet tanginess. and it's going to be good. That part I know. And they're still going to look like collards. And for the most part, taste like collards. I had a much easier journey than Meherwan did in that sense.
I think it's so special. So you both probably don't know, you're talking about the people. So it's not just the food. It's like the people, the environment, everything. So Meherwan, when my husband and we lived in Tennessee, and our first time we took an anniversary trip and left our kids, we came to Asheville and we came to Chai Pani. And so that was such like a, wow, this exists here. Look at all these white people eating this food. This is amazing. And then for Vish, because of your restaurant, like my office is actually based in Memphis, so I work remotely. So multiple times my staff have come to the restaurant, and for my boss, he and his wife, your restaurant is their favorite restaurant in the country because they cannot find the types of flavors, foods, textures that they find in your restaurant. And it's you on a plate, right? Nobody else can create what you're doing, which is, I would say the same thing about Chidi Kumar, right? Like the things that she puts out, nobody can like make that except her because it's herself on the plate. So you both have created cuisines, but also environments where there is celebration and joy. And even for me, sometimes I'm coming through Asheville for a business trip and I'm like, oh, let me just stop in and get something quick. So I am just so thankful for how you both have done you in your perspective places based on your background, what you have available. And then when you all created Brown in the South, you gave me a voice and identity that I could feel like here in the Knoxville, Tennessee area, I could step forward and be like, hey, you know what? I'm a Malayali from the North. I'm a Yankee transplanted to the South, but I've been here 24 years. And I can share things about chai, and that's my entryway for people with learning about Indian cuisine. But I can also make you a really good jambalaya. And don't even get me started on my chocolate pecan pie, because I grew up here, and these are all things that I love to eat and make for other people. But it's because of your leadership and your voice that has given me that confidence. So I'm just so thankful for what you both have put into our culture and our country, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably speak for Meherwan as well. Part of the reason
he always speaks for me.
Yes. Part of the reason I think we've been able to do that or continue to do that is because we both feel very secure in who we are, and we really appreciate our background, and we are proud of where we are from. While it's a very old culture, it has continued to evolve. And again, I mean, India of 40 years ago when I left is not the India of now. It continues to evolve, right? And that is the same thing with any place that has different waves of immigrants come through. So I just looked around and said, hey, if America has been able to accept the Lebanese and the Chinese and the Sicilians and the Irish, Armenians, all those folks that have come and, left a mark, we are no different. We're going to leave a mark as well. And it's inevitable that we will. That has always been my mindset. What was going to keep me back, if anything, was if I didn't force myself into the door, I was going to go out and get it, right? Are there struggles? Sure. Are there occasional hiccups or people that don't want us around? Sure. But that's been the case for every immigrant that has come through here. There's always been some notion that we don't want you, or that if we let you in, then things are going to somehow change who we are. And I just don't subscribe to that. So I think change is good. I think change is what makes this place tick. Anyway, on that note, I have to run and go to work. So you guys continue talking, and you can talk about me and all that. Good to see you, Jess.
Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Of course.
Bye, Betty. Leaving for India to do photography for the upcoming Chai Pani cookbook. That's a couple years out, but it's in progress. And Vish, I invited him to join me because it's all this fun traveling with Vish. He's so learned about places and food and cuisine, and we just have a good time together. We'll just basically argue the whole time we're there, but it'll be fun. He's going to see his dad in Gujarat. I'm going to see my family. Then we're going to connect in Bombay and do a bunch of photography.
That's super fun. I remember when Manish Chauhan went to India to do the photography for her cookbook, which we posted on Instagram, and I was like, oh, this is going to be a beautiful book, which it is. So I'm excited. I guess all of you are like putting cookbooks out. You're having restaurants. Did you really ever imagine when you were like growing up, this could be your life?
No, I mean, it's funny. I mean, growing up, I kind of always had a sense that I would end up in America, or maybe England, because I was born in England and my parents were there for a few years as expats, but then they returned to India when I was 5. But I always kept my British citizenship, my British passport, because some part of me, and I think my parents always imagined that that would be my literally passport out of
Yeah.
India to, higher education or a better life. And you have to remember, like, if somebody's wondering, listen to this, like, well, why was it so important to leave India to have a better life? Well, in the 70s and 80s, I mean, my parents did not go to college, sort of lived a very sort of middle class lifestyle that was very much about being supported by their family. My dad was blind, is blind, and so he couldn't go out and work. For women at the time, it'd be very hard to just go out of the workplace and get a job, especially, if they hadn't gone to college. They were married very young. My dad was 25, my mom was 8. So much of growing up in India and the opportunities to have, at least back then, had to do with where you were in the socioeconomic ladder, right? Your caste, your last name, all of that mattered as much as what degree you had. Thankfully, things have changed dramatically since then. But in their minds, in order for me to break out of whatever cycle that I may have been stuck in, it was important that I leave and come abroad. But, again, I thought and they thought that that meant higher education and that traditional job we are talking about. And which I did. I mean, for 19 years after I came and went to college, I was in sales, I was in marketing, I was in real estate. I didn't have the academic rigor. I had the intelligence, but not the rigor of the discipline to go to medical school or to go to engineering college. It just was lazy and it bored me. So instead of, aspiring for those kind of jobs, I just did sort of your standard American hodgepodge of mid-level jobs until 2009 came along. The Great Recession had just started. And in that moment, I was faced with a choice of, do I reinvent myself one more time with yet another job in sort of along the lines of what I was doing? Or do I go out on a limb and try something completely different? Chose the latter. So here we are.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot to learn. I think I was 48 when I started my personal chef business, and I felt like there was so much startup of just my brain learning how everything worked, right? So you had a business background. Was that helpful in starting Chai Pani?
Oh, I think it was critical. I think, again, I think most people that have found success late in life would argue that finding it late in life gave them a lot of experience and time and wisdom and knowledge and perspective, which gave them a better shot at success later in life than not. I mean, I know, like, our media seems obsessed with young founders, especially because of the tech industry and Silicon Valley. And you look around and everybody, from Zuckerberg to, Sam Altman, we were just all these young people. If you actually look at the data, more successful American businesses are founded, not the fancy ones, not the glamorous ones, but successful ones by people later in life. And many of them have had a few failures along the way before they got to the later life phase, because it gives you just a lot of skills that, may not intuitively directly apply to the business, but do. For example, a lifetime of sales in the luxury car business, working for Lexus and then for Mercedes. Well, not a lifetime, like about almost 12 years, taught me branding, taught me how human psychology. As I mean, I argue all the time, like, people don't buy a Mercedes because they need a car. You can buy a Honda and do the same thing. People buy a Mercedes because it means something to them. Status, ego, whatever it is. Having a deep understanding of that, I was able to apply it to when I first opened the restaurant. That it's not just about the product, it's about how you present it, the stories you're telling around it, the ambiance, the environment, the customer service, and the branding. Chai Pani gets a lot of acclaim for our branding and our brand and our look and our aesthetic and our social media. And a lot of that's driven, I mean, I've got a great team that pulls it off. But the importance of that was evident to me on day one, before we even opened, that we want to open with a line down the road, down the block. And the way to do that is to lean heavily into this idea of storytelling and having a brand. I would argue, actually, just that if I'd started Chai Pani in my 20s, I don't know if it would have been successful. I don't think we would have the restaurants we have today. What I'm trying to say is, like, the restaurant part of it, you can figure that out. I mean, good God, everybody and their mother opens a restaurant all the time.
Right.
So that's not the hard part, if you will. The hard part is that if you don't have this, this background, this understanding of how to make it successful, that's when so many of them fail. Almost the barrier to entry to open a restaurant is too low, in my opinion. I see so many folks that think they have a great idea, open a restaurant and fail, because I feel like I wish the barrier to opening was higher. It would save people a lot of heartache and financial ruin if the entry to opening a restaurant was higher. And not financially higher, I mean intellectually higher. Like you really got to know what the hell you're doing before you decide you want to open a restaurant. Do you understand marketing? Do you understand human psychology? Do you understand business? Do you understand cash flow? Do you understand banking? Do you understand, scheduling? Do you understand human emotions and managing people? I mean, everybody thinks of restaurants, oh, I make great food and I have a great looking space. No, how you manage your staff is more indicative of whether you're going to end up being successful or not than how good your food is.
No, I agree. And in fact, on this podcast, most of the people I have on here that are entrepreneurs are older. Like they started their business after 35, and it's the life that you lived, the hardships, learning how to persevere, the failures that give you that grit to like think, oh, this might actually work. This is a passion. But all that other stuff is what helps you to make it through. And one very important piece we haven't talked about is Molly, right? Because Molly has been part of all of this from the beginning. And I'm guessing you're more the extrovert and she's the introvert, just because we see your face all the time. But I, as a woman especially, know, oh, it is like equally Molly there.
No, we actually flipped roles somewhere halfway through our life together and the open restaurant. When Molly and I first met, I was the quiet, shy Indian.
Really?
And to me, Molly was just this bright. I mean, everybody loved Molly. Everybody still loves Molly. She was, just warm and friendly and always knew the right thing to say to the right person. I mean, even till today, the joke is that anybody has a problem at Chai Pani, they'll come to talk to Molly first about it, right? And I was sort of more introverted. And then along the way, I think with the business, I always imagined myself as not a chef, but as an entrepreneur that happened to open a restaurant and needed to be in the kitchen because, as a startup, that's what you do. You wear all hats. You're the dishwasher, you're the cook, you're doing the shopping. But as Chai Pani's success grew and notoriety grew, attention from the outside started focusing more and more on me, not just me and Molly or Molly. So within the business, I think, Molly is as much, if not more forward-facing than I am internally. To the outside world, they want to talk to the brown guy who's the chef because in their mind, I'm the brand. It's Indian street food, So, but 100% internally, I mean, you ask anybody, of the 350 employees in terms of how critical roles are, they would almost argue Molly's role is more critical than mine. Because I've done my job. I've opened the restaurant. I painted a vision. We've got a menu. Things are in motion. People are trained. Everyone knows what they're doing. We're hopefully not going to screw that up, right? But the ongoing part is the relationships, the culture, the storytelling, the staff, dealing with them, handling turnover, handling motivating. Molly plays an integral role in that.
For people who don't know, Molly is not Indian. So for your family, originally, did they have an opinion that you were marrying somebody that wasn't Indian?
Again, good point. I mean, again, growing up culturally, families, and even I would argue to a certain degree, even today, even though India likes to think of itself as a very modern country and families think of themselves as more forward-looking, some of these cultural norms run deep, right? Culturally, parents want their kids to marry within their community, within their caste, within their religion. They just find that because families in India look at it like, well, it's not just these two kids getting married, two families are getting married. We got to live with these other people and like them. And it makes it easier if, there's certain things in common. And again, if somebody's thinking, listening to this podcast and they're like, well, isn't being Indian in common? Like, oh God, no. I mean, you probably talked about this, I'm sure other guests have talked about this, sure. India is 50 different countries that happen to be all clumped together. Think of India as Europe. And think of Maharashtra and Kerala as different as Spain is from Italy. Some similarities because they're Mediterranean countries, but still you wouldn't confuse the two. So yes, just like, if you were Italian, you'd hope that your kids married somebody Italian, then not Spanish or not, Greek or French. My parents would have loved, just instinctively, for me to have married someone that was from within our community, quote unquote. But I think the minute they understood that I was leaving for America, things changed. I think that's one of the things that they had to acknowledge and accept, that, we were now going to live a life that was separated from and different from the family core and the family community, that they couldn't quite control that aspect of my life the way they could have, and often happens if I was still in India, because the family units, multi-generationally stay together. I mean, on my mom's side of the family, if I my at one point there were one, two, three, four generations living under one roof in my Naniji's house, my maternal grandmother's house in Dehradun. Um, so yeah, and it also helps that Molly is incredible. They fell in love with her the minute they met her, and Molly had traveled to India many times on her own before she met me, so she had a lot of familiarity with the Indian culture. And it also helps that she is completely in love with India's culture and India's spirituality.
Hmm.
It's a big part of her life, so it's not a chore for me to say, let's go to India together.
Yeah. No, like the little that I know of her, and it's mostly when you all during the pandemic would do your chai cooking on
Chai
Instagram
time.
Live, and she would be filming you, but you can hear her. And I was like, she
Yeah.
sounds so cool. Like, no wonder
Yeah.
Meherwan does well because he has her.
I mean, I'm a big believer in partnership. Of course, you can go at this thing yourself, but I think a good partnership isn't one person trying to change the other or influence the other and vice versa. It's just making sure that, both voices are heard. And I think the story is richer. Think of it as hitting a single note on a piano versus hitting multiple notes on a piano. You can still be playing the same chord, but each key is different.
Mm.
But when three keys or four keys together, still form a chord. And I love that analogy because that's kind of how we try to do decision making at Chaipani. We still want to be unanimous and sound like harmonious, but it allows everybody to be slightly have a different opinion or a different input, a different key, that makes up the chord. So the big picture, we're aligned, and but we still get to be individual.
Okay, so Molly had been to India and you grew up there, but then you've been in America. So both of you have really seen faith expressed differently, like in different continents. But then also being Parsi, there's also the Zoroastrian history, right? So tell me a
Mhm.
little bit about that and how any of that has really informed, your worldview, your faith has informed your life and your work.
My mom grew up in a Hindu Brahmin family, and my dad grew up as a Parsi. So the fact that they were both married is also unusual because these interfaith marriages back then weren't very common. You can be of a certain religion, let's say you're Hindu or you're Muslim, and let's say you're a certain sect of Hinduism, you're Shivite or Vishnite or, but it's not uncommon also to have what we call a Baba, a spiritual leader, like Sai Baba from Shirdi. You could be Hindu but still follow Sai Baba's teachings. And in a way that spiritual master in India, and India has a long tradition of spiritual masters, it helps a family lean deeper into their relationship with the religion. So my family were followers of a particular spiritual master in India called Meher Baba. And so I grew up with sort of his teachings, and it really helped me become more secular. I
Hmm.
mean, as it is, I had to reconcile, Hinduism with, Zoroastrianism. Growing up in India, also, like my friends, half of them were Muslim, some of them were Christian, and even in the Christians, there was a couple that were Catholic, there was a couple that was Protestant. Growing up as a kid, quite often, all the temples would be very close together. The Hindu temple, the masjid, the mosque, the Sikh temple, the Gurudwara, and the church would all be in the same neighborhood, quite often in a row. So as a kid, you didn't think twice about going to the Gurudwara and then going to the masjid and then going to this thing. And, for Hindus, and I mean, for Indians, quite often we're able to reconcile all religions, especially as kids. I mean, it's a shame that as we grow up, these divides start to appear that seem driven by tribalism more than a major difference in belief systems, especially, let's say, Hindus and Muslims. When I came to America, I realized that I was more interested in understanding spirituality as it pertains to how to live a good life than religion. Chaipani and our company is very much influenced by my spiritual understanding and belief. And at the very basic level, it is, if we were to boil it down, it is to do the most good you can in the world while you're here. And you can do it in small ways, you can do it in big ways, you can do it one-on-one with each other, but there's a duty, if you will, almost, to do the most good. And the things that you do, whether you're growing a restaurant business or starting a spice empire or selling cars, at the end of the day are a means to the end, which is to do good in the world. And for sometimes the doing good in the world, maybe you're just providing for your family in the best way you can. And sometimes doing good for the world is like you're well past needing to provide for your family, and now you can provide for a larger family, your employees and their families, or an even larger family. In this case, let's say the Dhaaravi Diary, the community in the largest slum in India that we took on as a family that we want to support. So that's how spirituality has influenced at a macro level. Again, I'm quoting from Meherwan's teachings. The line that I love is mastery and servitude. I spoke about that, Molly and I, at a conference at the Lincoln Center on to the industry of hospitality. Behind me on the wall is a poster, and if I turn this over a little bit, I know, well, you can't see it. It says mastery and servitude. It looks like a Bollywood poster, but it was actually put together by the folks that ran the conference that we attended. It was actually Will Gurdara, one of the owners back then of 11 Madison, which is considered one of the best restaurants in the country. And Will now, teaches hospitality and has written a book on hospitality. He was a student of an employee of Danny Myers. So there's that connection is there, and it informs everything from how we write policies to how we think of our guests. The other day, I was walking by our downtown Asheville restaurant, which we've closed and moved to a new location where we're about to put a botiwala in there. But in the meantime, it's closed up and some construction happening. And a homeless guy was sleeping in the little entryway before the door opens. And the first instinct I had was like, oh, good God, how do I get this guy out of here? But then where that spiritual influence kicks in is your mind immediately goes like, well, actually, no. The question I should be asking, how can I help him the most? Maybe one outcome of me helping him is that he then moves out of there, but that shouldn't be the impetus. The impetus should be, how do I help this person? Mm-hmm. And whatever comes out of it comes out of it. So
yeah, I definitely get that. Maybe that's why there's such a connection, because I definitely feel you put people first. And I think I heard you say this before. One of the other things that really motivated you to move to Asheville and start this restaurant was to spend more quality time with your family, because you weren't able to do that elsewhere. So again, you're putting your family first. But then how can we do this with all the experience you had and your passions and desires? So I continue to hear how you invest in ways to bring joy to people. I mean, every time I go to your restaurant, everybody's so happy. It's like a party, like including your staff. I'm not just saying the customer, I'm including your staff. So it's a great feeling to see. And we don't always do everything right, but if that's like your goal, like I've seen you hit that goal.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and you're right. It's all, and I never want to come off as we figured it all out. It's always a goal, it's an aspiration, but it's the North Star.
Important question. Do you own a curry leaf plant?
Oh, yes. It's my baby. I mean, I watch as winter comes in the fall, in the cooler months, I will literally look at the temperature every day to see when it's going to drop below 42 at night, because that's my cutoff. The minute I see temperature dropping below 42, that baby's coming indoors. And then every year its leaves fall in the winter, finally, even with indoor. And then when the sun's just coming out, I bring it out. There's always that moment of, oh my God, I hope it comes back.
Yeah.
This year. And it always is just absolutely glorious. And now I've got like little baby curry saplings growing. And so I don't need more than one curry plant, but I'm going to pop the saplings and hand them out to folks as gifts. And that curry plant itself was a gift to me by another Indian. So I love the idea of it being this plant that's been a gift, and I can continue handing them out as gifts.
So that's literally what we do too, where I'll take the babies and I'll gift it. And then I ask almost every guest this question that comes from the South subcontinent. Sam Four was on here one time, and the number one tip I got from her is when it's looking kind of sad, especially in the winter indoors, if it gets spider mites or whatever, just strip out every single branch and trust the process, and it will come back. And it has every time. I mean, like now it's beautiful, but yeah, I'm continuing to give the little babies as gifts to people.
And it's funny that you have spider mite problems too. That's the biggest problem indoors is the spider mite problem. Yeah. And exactly, I've just started stripping it. I mean, I've actually started stripping it slightly ahead of time before the leaves start getting that weird, funky look in the wintertime. And then I put them in like Ziploc bags and freeze them. Yeah. Or sometimes I'll dry them out. And it always comes back. Isn't it crazy how nature just manages to, produce a miracle every year?
Right. I love it. Yeah. And I feel like for me, I don't have a lot that I'm retaining of my heritage because I live in Appalachia. I raised my kids here. I don't speak Malayalam or any other Indian language, but I can cook some really good South Asian Indian food. And I have a curry leaf plant. So I feel like something is going with me.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the things that connect me to home are the curry plant and the my mint garden, because I love making Irani chai, and Irani chai has mint in it, and lemongrass. I have a little lemongrass plant, and also the lemongrass in Irani chai. So those three things, and always having fresh ginger in the fridge. Something about having fresh ginger in the fridge, whether it's for chai, whether it's for cooking, like you feel like I can make something Indian, South Asian. So yeah. And the curry plant for me, though, I mean, again, growing up in Maharashtra, I mean, as you know, like while the curry plant grows all over India, it's more predominantly used in South Indian cooking, But Maharashtra being that funny state that divides the North from the South to a certain degree, the curry leaf has come in a lot into some of our cuisine, and I love it. I'll put it in everything if I can.
Yeah, it's the popping in the oil that like brings so much joy.
And the aroma, it's the release of the aroma, that mustard seeds and curry leaf and turmeric and oil. Hey, it's just like, it's a good time. It's like for somebody throwing onions and butter, it's just, it's going to be good. Yeah.
Right. So if you had to choose, what is your go-to drink? Is it chai, tea, coffee?
Chai, 100% chai. I mean, I named a restaurant after it. Chai Pani.
But it also has pani, so it could have been water.
It's chai pani, and it's always chai. I mean, I've gotten to now where I have a travel kit of my tea leaves because I have to use the CTC, to make the real chai. My strainer, because that'll be the one thing I always forget. Like, not every household has a strainer because why would they, right? They have colanders and large strainers, but not the little chimney for making tea, and a little packet of, my little spice wallet dab of cardamom. Ginger I can find in the store. I'm not worried about that. But if I find my tea, my strainer, and my cardamom pods, I can make chai anywhere in the world.
That's awesome. I just met and did a podcast with Sajani Amasiri, and she has a company called Cola Goodies, and she developed, that wasn't her first product, wasn't chai. It was some other superfood. She's from Sri Lanka, but hers is you just add hot water. To me, I'm like, okay, whatever. But then I tasted it, and I was like, oh my word. If you had not told me that this was just add hot water, I would never have guessed it. So I have that.
Oh, wait, what's it called again? What's the company called?
Cola Goodies, Kola. I'll introduce you to her. She's great.
Please do. I mean, India has been making, you can go to Indian grocery stores and buy instant chai.
Yeah.
And I buy them all and I come home and I try them. I haven't found one yet that doesn't still taste a little chalky. Or a little thin or maybe too sweet. So I'm trust me, I don't want to spend the 30 minutes that it takes to make chai every day. If I could find, the instant chai that works in a pinch, I'm happy to do that too.
Well, I actually narrowed it down to 5 minutes of making chai from scratch, but using the microwave. And people don't believe me, but when they taste it, they're like, oh, I would not have. And it's just that it's science, right? It's just the process that's heating up. But I have a whole method of it. Because it's true, I don't want to spend 30 minutes, but I will do like 5-6 minutes.
Wonderful.
What would you say to 18-year-old Meherwan based on what you know today?
Oh, wow. What I would say to 18-year-old Meherwan.
It doesn't have to be about the business, just in general.
No. I would say that, to have stuck with things longer. I think 18-year-old Meherwan was impatient that things weren't working out the way he wanted them to, he'd quickly move on to the next thing. I did so many things in my youth where, looking back, if I'd stuck a few of those things out, I would have been better off for it. Now, of course, one could argue that if I had stuck it out, would have ended up where I am today. Maybe it is but I think the lesson of sticking it out, that things get hard, things are not always interesting at work, things can be boring, you may not have the best boss, but those things are temporary, that you focus on, the big picture of what it is that you want to accomplish, and it'll help you overcome. I would give that advice to any 18-year-old today, that I noticed that when things get hard, they kind of, want to tap out and go find something else that fulfills them. And I would say you will be fulfilled if you first figure out how to fulfill others.
Yeah, that whole servitude attitude, right? Because some people think that's demeaning or lower, and people don't realize, no, serving brings
No, it's
everything
not.
high.
No. Yeah. I mean, I think, well, I'll leave it at that. I think you said it well.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you've got restaurants and cookbook and family and hopefully vacation, getting a little rest in there too.
No, this was absolutely delightful. I really enjoyed this. It was so fun that Vish came and as a surprise. He's a legend. One day they should put a statue up of him in the square in Oxford, Mississippi. I'll make the suggestion to the town one day.
That would be so fun. Aww.
That'd be fun. I mean, he's an absolute legend and a gem of person, and this was really delightful. I really love this.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Tell Molly hello, and I will put all the links to how to find you and all your stuff in the podcast.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Jess.
Take care.
Have a good one.
Bye. Thank you so much for joining us. That was the best. They're so fun. And I'm so glad I connected with these men who have really gone through things to get to where they are. And success is not an overnight thing, as most of my guests will tell you. If you've missed any of the episodes, you can go back and watch on YouTube. You can listen on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. I am so glad. Next time we will have another special guest. Until then, be wise and be bold.